Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Sanibonani, Tobel, goeienaand dames en heren, baie welkom by hierdie plechtigheid vanaand. Let me begin with the protocols. Firstly, let me take this opportunity to acknowledge the Acting Executive Dean of the Faculty of Sciences, Professor Anamotete, Professor Catherine Ngila, your loved ones and your special guests this evening, Professor Prof Kringle, our respondent. We're truly grateful to have you this evening. He's from the Department of Chemistry at the Tshwane University of Technology. And senior academics and leaders of the university present, members of Senate and other academics, distinguished guests, especially colleagues of Professor Ngila. I notice on our guest list this evening we have colleagues of hers also from MinTech and the CSIR. It's indeed a very special and a great honor for me to welcome you to the Professorial inaugural lecture of Professor Catherine Ngila. As I do so, I wish to express, as I did earlier, but to affirm again, a warm welcome to her loved ones, to all of her children, to her nieces and nephews who have been able to make the journey here this evening to join her on this very special occasion. Your other special guests and of course your colleagues. This is indeed a proud and a joyful moment. It's also a landmark moment for all of you, for Professor Ngila, and of course for all of us here at the University of Johannesburg and higher education in South Africa and beyond. When weighing up the roles that Vice-Chancellors perform, and those are pretty varied roles, graduations are very important moments in the life of our graduates and of the university. Award ceremonies, typically this time of the year, where we recognize outstanding scholars and teachers. The many public meetings and roles that Vice-Chancellors perform. I suggest that perhaps the most important role, indeed the most joyous role of Vice-Chancellors, is to be able to inaugurate their colleagues into the very important roles of the university's most senior scholars. And so it does give me great joy and pleasure to oversee and to officiate at this function. Now, inaugurations are the opportunities for the formal investiture of a person into high office, and of course it marks the formal, the symbolic assumption of office, of duties of office, or position of authority. And so today is the day that marks the rites of passage and the entry of Professor Ngila into the distinguished community of university's most senior scholars. It is indeed an office and a position of authority and leadership which we shall not assume lightly. But we shall do so with considerable and ongoing thought, reflection, deliberation, and dare I add, presence of mind. I remarked a moment ago that the professorial inauguration is as important to the incumbent and their loved ones and colleagues as it is to the university. And I say this since the inaugural lecture is as much a reflection on the state of the university and the intent of the contemporary university. And of course, how it measures up to Professor Ngila's inaugural lecture this evening on metals everywhere, the good and the bad. I'm reminded of the reflections of Professor Emmanuel Wallerstein, who spoke not so long ago at our Humanities lecture series, as he considers his own journey and the role of the university's most senior scholar. And he observed on that occasion that, and I quote, "It seems to me that it is the duty of the scholar to be politically and intellectually subversive of received truths. But that the only way this subversion can be scholarly useful, or socially useful, is if it reflects a serious attempt to engage with and understand the real world as best as we can." I'm also reminded that there are very few books available, even in decent bookstores, on what it is to be a professor, and in particular what the freedoms and duties of this most senior scholar of the university is. In this regard, I offer you the reflections of a colleague, Bruce McFarlane, at Hong Kong University, who in his recent book, published last year, entitled Intellectual Leadership in Higher Education, Renewing the Role of the University Professor, seeks to correct this oversight, and he argues convincingly, in my view at least, that given the marketization of the university and the corporatization of the research agenda, professors must reclaim professorial leadership, and that they thus occupy a very, very special role. Specifically, McFarlane argues that two freedoms, namely that of critic and of advocate, are essential for professors to execute what he calls their four duties, being those of mentor, of guardian of standards, of enabler of networking and mobilizer of resources for others, and fourthly, that of being ambassador for the institution or the discipline. And so this evening we will have only one small insight into how Professor Ngila responds to this call for the return of professorial leadership. And so let me now invite the acting executive dean of the faculty, Professor Anna Moteta, to introduce formally for us Professor Ngila. I thank you. Bye, Naki.
Thank you, Prof. And on that note, I observe protocol. Professor Catherine Ngila's academic path has been as follows. Professor Ngila received her Bachelor of Education in Science and MSc in Chemistry from Kenyatta University, Kenya in 1986 and 1992 respectively. She obtained her PhD from University of New South Wales, Sydney, Australia. Her teaching and research career started in 1989 when she was employed as a tutorial fellow at Kenyatta University and later promoted to lecturer in 1996 after obtaining her PhD degree. She has also worked at the University of Botswana at both ranks as lecturer and senior lecturer from 1998 to 2006, and also at the University of KwaZulu-Natal as senior lecturer, before joining University of Johannesburg as a professor of analytical and environmental chemistry in April 2011. Professor Ngila is currently the head of applied chemistry department at the university. Her analytical environmental research work focuses on water pollution monitoring, developing analytical methodologies for detecting metal pollutants and other chemical substances, including their speciation analysis in water. She is currently investigating nanocomposite electrospun fiber sorbents and nanocomposite membranes for removal of pollutants in contaminated drinking water and wastewater effluents. Professor Ngila is a member of various chemical societies, including American Chemical Society, the Royal Society of Chemistry, and South African Chemical Institute, among other societies. She received awards from German Academic Exchange Service towards her MSc degree, and Equity and Merit Scholarship Scheme from the Australian International Development Assistance Bureau for her PhD studies. She also received Kenyatta University Vice Chancellor Research Award in 1997, University of Botswana Research Award in 2005, funding also from the National Research Foundation for a high-resolution scanning electron microscopy unit in 2010. Also from the Water Research Commission, among other awards. Professor Ngila has authored and co-authored over 80 peer-reviewed research articles, review articles and book chapters, and has presented over 90 conference papers in different countries, including the USA, United Kingdom, Switzerland, Australia, Turkey, South Africa, Swaziland, Botswana, Namibia, Tanzania, Kenya, Lesotho, Ghana, and Senegal, among other countries. She has graduated over 50 honors, masters, and PhD students, including training of postdoctoral fellows. Currently, she has a research group of about 20 postgraduate students and postdoctoral fellows. Thank you.
Vice Chancellor, Professor Rensberg, the Executive Dean, Professor Mutiti, my respondent to the inaugural lecture, Professor Robert McCringle from Swana University of Technology, Executive Deans who are here from other faculties, Deputy Deans, Executive Directors, they are here today, Heads of Departments and Schools, and their deputies, colleagues, the students who are here, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure for me, really, as Vice Chancellor said, that today is that day that you have to define yourself as a professor. And so therefore, it's a very joyous occasion and a very important one. Now, before I start with my formal lecture, I would like to probably share some divisions of the subject of chemistry with colleagues who are not necessarily in the field of science or in chemistry. And so therefore, my talk is going to be divided into about 7 parts, which are looking at the first part being metals in the environment, metals in drinking water, foodstuffs, and cookware, metals in pharmaceutical products, metals in fuels, metals in fresh water, such as the Okavango Delta, including other wastewater treatment systems. Then also looking at the good about metals, such as using them as detectors, as metal electrodes, and metals that are now playing a key role in nanotechnology for water treatment. Vice Chancellor, as I'd just indicated, to share a bit of my area of chemistry, I would like to share with the colleagues here and the guests who are here that chemistry traditionally is divided into 4 divisions. But obviously you have seen that from the talk from the booklet, it's written that I'm a professor of applied chemistry, and I'm just going to share with you where that division lies. It's not a traditional division, it's a division that I'm going to explain. And so therefore, starting with the first division, which is analytical chemistry, that is where we're looking at how to quantify things, how to quantify pollutants, for example, in the environment, identify them and quantify them. We've got the physical chemistry division that looks at, applies physics just to understand the forces of nature. For example, earthquakes. Who explains what is happening there? Physical chemists play a very key role together with the physicists. The organic division, that is organic chemistry, deals with what we call the carbon and hydrogen chemistry. And so it will look at the alcohol. I'm sure that we are not taking alcohol here, but it will look at alcohols or organic pharmaceutical things or substances, all fall under organic chemistry. The inorganic chemistry by division is anything that doesn't have carbon and hydrogen. So we say there are non or inorganic substances that don't have carbon and hydrogen. But that definition is not quite correct. As you will see, for those who are familiar with carbonates, it has got carbon, yet carbonate is inorganic chemistry. It falls under inorganic chemistry. So therefore, these divisions are just for convenience, I must say. And so therefore, so where does applied chemistry fall in? Well, applied chemistry, as the name suggests, it's an applied field. So we utilize these divisions of chemistry. We utilize organic chemistry to understand what is in medicine. We also utilize applied chemistry to understand the forces of nature as well, what is available in the rains. And so therefore, that field is basically looking at the application of chemistry in various areas. Now, I'll start with the first part of the presentation, which is the introduction to metals. As I indicated, the focus, the journey, I've taken a long journey with metals, starting with 1987. And before we understand that journey, let's first understand what are metals. And so metals, by definition, are inorganic substances. And I've just given you an introduction to the divisions of chemistry, where inorganic chemistry is anything that doesn't have carbon and hydrogen, which is a loose definition. And so therefore, metals fall in that category. Now, I'm sure majority of us, and particularly the Mintech group of people who deal with metals every day, will be able to tell you that we don't just find metals lying anywhere. So we have to extract them. We have got to mine them. And so they appear, or they occur in the ores that are found on the earth. And now, so this is just to show you some of the examples, which we are all familiar with, of extraction of metals in mining industry, for example. Looking at that is a semi-product, which probably is going to turn out to be gold. And we are going to see that we are going to use that one for our rings, our gold rings, and many other applications. So obviously, from these diagrams here, we can be able to see that really we deal with metals every single day, including the microphone that I'm using here. This is a metal part. So it is everywhere that you find metals. Now, we also find metals, aluminium, for example, has been utilized in form of a compound, aluminium sulfate, for water purification, and which is going to form the first part of my research work, which is aluminium sulfate, and the work that we did on that. And so this is basically to show you that that is aluminium, that is packaged aluminium, and we are going to dump it in the tanks to treat water. Now, then, because the talk says that we deal with metals, we've got the good things about metals and the bad things about metals, I started by first looking at what are the essential metals. And so therefore, as you can see there, the essential metals are things that we need for our health. And I'm just going to show you a bit of chemistry, not that I'm going to give you a long lecture on chemistry, but at least to share you something we called periodic table. So all elements on Earth are found in the periodic table. Now, on that side of the periodic table, we call them nonmetals. So not everything here is a metal. So some of them are nonmetals, including fluoride, nitrogen, we are familiar with that. On this side, we have got the alkali metals. In the middle somewhere, we have got all these transition elements. Now, of importance is the essential and the non-essential elements. Now, anything that is in white, we don't need. Okay, so we can talk about essential mineral elements, and we can talk about essential non-mineral elements, and we can talk also about the beneficial. Now, beneficial is anything that we use and not necessarily we so badly need. However, essentials, we have to need them because they play part in metabolic processes that are existing in our bodies. And so therefore, on that particular slide, we're looking at some of the needs or some of the essential characteristics that we require. Like, for example, which metals are responsible for our blood cells, or rather found in the blood cells. Iron is there. We see zinc, it's available for our body functions, and many other of these elements, such that these are essentials because they play an integral part in most of the enzymes that are required for body metabolism. And so therefore, if they are not present, then we're going to come up with malfunctions in our systems. Now then, we also turn to the toxic metals. The toxic metals are anything we don't want to have. And so therefore, the toxic metals, examples with aluminium, we've got mercury. Aluminium has been associated with Alzheimer's disease. Normally it plays a role in a central nervous system, such that tomorrow you won't remember my name, even though you are young, because you have been exposed to aluminium. Mercury is a very dangerous metal. As you can see from putting red there to show you the limits, that is the guideline values according to different bodies, including the World Health Organization. The World Health Organization says that if you are to be exposed to aluminium, please don't have it more than 0.2 milligrams per liter. For mercury, please, that is a very toxic and also is carcinogenic metal that causes cancer. So therefore, the limits is quite small there. Now, if you move to the rest of the other metals that I've just given examples, and this list is not by all means exhaustive, just examples of some of them. As you can see, some of them, like zinc, in this particular case, zinc, we can handle zinc at large quantities. But then beyond this particular limit, it becomes quite hazardous. And so therefore, that is just to give you some examples. Just as a summary, I liked this diagram where it shows the whole body and the different diseases that we suffer from as a result of being exposed to aluminium, to metals, including aluminium. And so therefore, you can see the memory loss there, things like immune dysfunctions, joint stiffness, and many other types of ailments. Now, the second part of my talk, which is now going to be looking at the metals in drinking water. This is one particular area of interest because that's where my research started after my first degree. And I did a generic MSc chemistry. And therefore, now it was time after the theories to do research. So I walked around, and then I came across, but I approached Dr. Chris Foxall. Chris Buckley is a colleague of mine, so therefore, anytime I see Chris, it also comes to Buckley. But anyway, now, Chris Foxall had just come from East Anglia in the UK, and so therefore, there was a problem, which I'm just going to share with you, about aluminium sulfate being dumped in the wrong tanks. And as a result of that, he was quite wary about aluminium. So when he returned back to Nairobi, Kenya, and then I walked to his office, then I said, Dr. Foxall, I'm looking for a project for my MSc. He said, you got it. I said, which one? He said, you are going to investigate aluminium in drinking water. I said, why in particular? He said, you will learn later. And so later is when I learned this story about aluminium sulfate that was dumped in the wrong tank back in 6th of July 1988 in a water treatment works called Lower water treatment in the UK, for those who are familiar. And so what happens is that this driver was supposed to be doing part-time. So he was given about 20 tons of aluminium sulfate. And then instead of going to put in the right tank, he went and put in the processed water tank. So as a result of that, aluminium never did the job it was supposed to do. As a result of that, between 2 and 3 weeks, people are complaining with a lot of ailments, including stomach cramps and all that. So because Chris had just returned from UK, he was quite passionate about looking at the waters in Kenya to see whether we are also likely to be exposed to high levels of aluminium. Now, so I started my project looking at the different types of water sources, including the supplies, water supplies, looking at the borehole waters. Even also later we are going to see to look at the cookware. And then from my investigation, I was able to identify that the water supplies where they are using aluminum sulfate for treating water, it had the highest value there. And we are going to see that the rest of the other types of water systems had reasonably low values that were not of a lot of danger. Now, then later on, Chris said the story of, or rather the project doesn't stop with just looking at the water. Let's also look at the cookware as well as the foodstuffs that we are eating, we are exposed to. So at the time at Kenyatta University, where I did this particular project, I had to go around and collect different types of cookware, including aluminum cookware, clay pots, which are usually utilized by people in the rural areas. And so therefore, I investigated that and found that you probably are familiar with that person there. That's me cooking with the aluminum using the clay pot. And so therefore, what we found was if you are using aluminum cookware, particularly at different conditions, you are likely to leach a lot of aluminum. And so therefore, these levels, for those who are familiar with the parts per billion, that is micrograms per liter. But now if you convert to milligrams per liter, you realize that it was about 3.5 milligrams per liter. So that was not too bad, but it was bad in the sense that the limit for aluminum is 0.2. So those levels were already too high. But then, of course, you realize that these were just a synthetic solution, meaning that we just prepared the solutions. We've got tap water here, which is a community water, which was less than 0.5 milligrams per liter. Of course, the aluminosilicate form the part of clay, and which we also utilized for our cookware. So therefore, we also investigated that to find out whether we leach aluminum from these clay pots. And so in addition to that, we had to look at different types of cookware, including the pots, the pressure cooker. Pressure cooker happened to be one of the most dangerous to use, particularly if you are using aluminum pressure cooker. If you are using steel pressure cooker, then probably that won't be so much of a problem. Now, so we are asking ourselves, is it better then to use Teflon coated cookware or non-metallic cookware? And so the answer was yes, but then there would be other things also to worry about as toxins that come from the Teflon coated. So therefore, there is no safety. I guess we just have to wait for chance. Right, and so therefore the summary of my findings, and very, very important, particularly what I have in blue there, is that we looked at the different types, the different ways of cleaning, and whether the water is acidic or basic, as well as whether it contains other substances like organic functional groups or inorganic functional groups that are likely to cause aluminium to leach. So the chemistry of using aluminium shows that if you boil aluminium water with in aluminium cookware, it is likely to form an aluminium oxide, which is a layer that is formed and it prevents leaching of the metal. So that is good. And so therefore, if we utilize that, then that is good. But then in real life, you are likely to use either acidic solutions or basic solutions. So if you do that, the aluminium oxide that is that has formed as a layer then is dissolved. So then in that case, what we discovered was that if you clean the cookware, particularly aluminium, with abrasive or things like a steel wool, some of you are familiar with that, you are likely to leach out a lot of aluminium. So we say that if you do that, then boil the first round of water, throw it away, then you have formed the layer of aluminium oxide, which is now going to protect us. But then that layer will come out depending on what type of food that you are going to cook. So therefore, the journey continues about how to play games, hide and seek with the metals in our food and in our drinks. Now, like I said, that if you are using acidic substances or foods, then you are likely to leach aluminium. Depending on whether already we've got aluminium in the foods that we are using, like for example potatoes and many others. Now, this is just probably to appetize you, but at the same time caution you that be aware you might be having aluminium in your tea there, or in your biscuits because you are using sodium aluminium sulfates, phosphates, or it could be in your rice or in your potatoes. So therefore, we can't avoid running into trouble with this metal. Now, so then later we also found that other people had investigated that, who found that, say for example, tea accumulates a lot of aluminium. So tea that we drink is likely to to have high levels of aluminium. Vice Chancellor, my third part of presentation is metals in pharmaceutical products. What was the interest in this project? The interest in this project was, it was a project that we were approached by Sapi Cycle, that is the company that produces paper. We also have Monty, but Monty didn't approach us. So Sapi Cycle in Teben approached us to do some research to look at the products, that is the cellulose that is produced from wood, particularly because it is utilized, the products are found in making the capsule covering. And so therefore, if you take your tablets and cellulose is there, we want to find out what is the level of metals in those pharmaceutical products. And so therefore, as you can see that we've got different ways in which wood is utilized there, particularly the product of called pulp, the dissolving pulp, is likely to have, is utilized for making cellulose, which then is utilized to make the pulp, dissolving pulp, and the paper rolls, as well as the cellulose acetate capsules that I was talking about. So our interest mainly was this, to find out, because this goes into our bodies, all right? This one may not necessarily go. And so this one was our main target, to see whether we have got any metals that are present in these capsules. Now, so therefore, the aims, as I've just summarized, was to find out what is the level of these metals in the capsules, or in the materials that are used for in pharmaceuticals. And so therefore, we wanted to find out, and rather the project entails to go through the journey of starting from the wood, starting from the soil actually, going through the wood, going through the process, and finally the final products that are coming from the wood, to find out how much of the metal is present. So we went through a lot of rigorous exercise of looking through to see, is it in the foresty soil that we have got high levels of metals? Is it the lignin or the different parts of wood? Is it during the cooking of the wood, because you have to cook the wood to produce the pulp, dissolving pulp? Or is it in the final products, or where is it exactly? And so we did that research. And then the main finding of that was we found that depending on the product that we are utilizing, you could find that the dissolving pulp would be having high levels of metal, but then when it comes to the final products, some of the metal wears out during the process. So therefore, and also the final materials that are usually utilized for other applications contained high levels of, that is, residual metal in that particular product. Now, so our findings basically showed that calcium is one of the metals that was, but of course that was expected, because during the pulping process, you find that you're adding reagents that have got calcium, so the calcium was one of them. Lead was the least in that particular metals that we investigated. Now, the fourth part of my talk, Vice Chancellor, if I may just stop quickly to take water.
Sure that water is okay.
This water is bottled water, and I think it's okay. Now, so the fourth part of our research, of my research, was to look at the waters in Okavango. This was of interest, particularly at the time when I was at the University of Botswana, because there was claims that the Okavango water is pristine water, meaning that we don't expect dissolved pollutants in there. So our interest again was metals, and so we started the journey of investigation of the levels of metals in Okavango water, as well as other water systems that we utilized, or rather we investigated. And so therefore, probably just to share with you, Vice Chancellor and the distinguished guest, that Okavango River, which at least comes from Angola, or rather it originates from there, through the Quito and the Cubago rivers, then it gets into the Okavango River, and then it gets into the system, passing through Namibia. It comes to the Botswana system there, and it goes to the delta. So about 10 billion cubic meters of water usually per year are emptied into the Okavango Delta. And it spreads within about 6,000 kilometers squared. Okavango Delta, just for information, is found on the northern part of Botswana there. We also investigated other systems apart from the fresh water. That's Okavango Delta, and that is just basically to show the tributaries and how they branch in different places, forming the delta there. And so therefore, when we went to collect water, obviously we found people were busy plowing there. Children were playing in the water. We also had some friends in the water there, animals. And so therefore we said, but this water, why do they say Okavango water is pristine? And so we set the journey of investigation where we collected water from the river. We also went to the sediments that settled at the bottom. And then, interesting enough, we found that the water above, or rather the water that is on the surface, does not have metals. Yet, we can see there are so many activities that are taking place. And so later on, we realized that it's because of substances which we call the natural organic matter, such as the humic substances, that usually when they react with the metal, they lock this metal in such a way that the metal settles at the bottom of the water. And so therefore, if you collect the water on the surface, there is no metal. And so that was a very interesting discovery. Obviously, as long as the system is not disturbed or something happens, and so therefore the sediments will have to dissolve again to release the metal, then you are safe. So therefore, in our particular research when we were doing that, we wanted to find out exactly which part of the Okavango Delta water has got heavy metals that are settled there. And so like I said initially, that we found that they finally settle at the sediments, so therefore that explains why the water is pristine. Now, to be able to analyze that, as I indicated, that my area of chemistry is analytical chemistry applied in the environment. So therefore, as analytical chemistry, we have to look at the methodologies that we are going to use. Speciation was one of those key things that we are interested in. Speciation, why? Because it was because of the speciation of these metals that they settle at the bottom in the sediments, and they sit there and they don't come out in the water, and that is why the water is pristine. So we wanted to find out what are the species that are present. Because depending on what species, some species will be bioavailable or toxic, others may not be necessarily. So therefore, as analytical chemists, that is the journey we undertook, so that we can find out what are the species that are present in the water. Now, this just basically to show the fresh water from Okavango there, which is quite fresh, and when we looked at the metals, the dissolved metal, the levels compared to, let's say, for example, electroplating plants or the groundwater were reasonably low because of the speciation and also because of the presence of the humic substances. Now, again, Vice Chancellor, we are going towards the end of the journey of this presentation, but before we do that, we also looked at the metals in the fuels. Why of that of interest? Because it is not good to have metals in the fuel unless we are putting them as additives. And so therefore, this research is actually right now ongoing in our university here, where we are investigating a range of metals that are present. That is just basically to show what is happening in terms of the different parts or components of the petrol that are available. Of particular interest is the type of hydrocarbons that are found in the petrol. It is well established that if your petrol has got what we call the straight chains, this is straight chain, even though Vice Chancellor doesn't look very straight, but we call it a straight chain. If it has got straight chain, that petrol is not good. Hard petrol will be good if we are going to have branched chain. And so therefore, a mixture of that is going to give what we call the octane rating. Now, why is it very important to have this? Because of a problem called knocking. Because when you're trying to ignite your car, sometimes the car will ignite under pressure before it is time for it to do that. And that might give us problems on that. So as a result of that, petrol or different types of fuels must have a mixture of these two. And so you give it what we call the octane rating, depending on how much of the trimethyl pentane is present and how much of the straight chain is present. Now, that was not so much our interest. Our interest is to see that petrol, if we burn it, does it have metals? Does it release metals in the environment? Obviously, if their petrol is leaded, it's likely to have the discharge or the pollutants or the air pollution is likely to have lead. Likewise, the coal also contains sulfur, such that if you burn it, then you are going to release sulfur dioxide into the environment, including the metal oxides. Now, so what did we do? Or rather, what are we doing? Because this is, like I said, is an ongoing research. We set out to look for ways in which, if you take petrol and put it in the instrument, analytical instrument, the instrument is going to die. Okay. Now, to save the instrument from dying, we've got to prepare the sample so that we can extract the metals. So the interest here is to extract the metals, and you don't just extract. So you have to come up with methodologies as analytical chemists so that you can be able to remove what we call the matrix. And so the research is all geared towards that. If you manage to prepare your sample properly, then you are going to have what we call the high recovery values that are in the oils. We are also going to have high precision preconcentration factors, because these levels of metals are quite minute, and so therefore the instrument, you give it and it says, I can't find the metal, where is it? So therefore you've got to do what we call preconcentration. And we are also interested in terms of the detection limits. We are also interested in the precision. Can I repeat this experiment many times? And so therefore get the same value. And so therefore, as a result of these sample preparation techniques that we have embarked on, we were able now to show that we can get recovery values as high as 98%, which is quite good. Now, I promised that it is going to be the second last part, but I think I calculated wrongly. So therefore, this is the second last now. All right. Now, the second last part of my presentation is something just I wanted for the fun of simply showing the journey of metals I've taken, particularly during my PhD work, whereby we were looking at electrodes, and probably I'll just show you the next one there. We were looking at aluminium electrodes and use them as sensors. Of particular interest is, probably just to show you the diagrams there, that we are interested in the flow cells that we utilize as detectors for different pollutants. But before we get there, we had to do something called signal amplification. Signal amplification in this particular case meant that we can put one cell, another cell, 10 cells or 6 cells, and amplify the signal. But what is that? Why is it important to amplify the signal? As I said initially, detection limits in terms of instrumentation is very, very important. So you analyze this water, like you asked me whether the water that I'm drinking has got metals, and I said it is packaged water, so that was a lie. It's possible that it has got metals. Now, so sometimes you put that water into the instrument, and the instrument says there is no metal here, so you're safe. But later you realize that depending on the type of instrument that you're using or the technique, you're likely to find metals there. So therefore, what we were aiming to do here was to to amplify the signal so that we can be able to detect properly, because the signals are too low and you need to amplify them to be able to see. And so therefore, what was the interest there was to put these cells in series and be able to see whether we can multiply the potentials that we were measuring. And it was a long mathematical formula there. We were calculating the resistances between the electrodes, whether it's external and external. And so therefore we are able to identify that it was possible to amplify the signals. We used that detector for the purpose of detecting various substances in water, particularly the diagram that shows what we did after we managed to get the sensors. And so therefore we were able to detect metals in water, in beverages, and even foodstuffs, as a way of trying to show the usefulness of that particular technology that we developed. Now this is the last one. Vice Chancellor, currently we are talking about nanotechnology. And so therefore, we are not left behind in terms of nanotechnology. We are utilizing nanotechnology for various things, particularly the interest that we have in our department and also for my research is the purification of water. Now, I just wanted to share first what is nanotechnology, and we can say it is a science, engineering, or technology that has got dimensions between 1 and 100 nanometers, but we have amplified now, we have added to 500. So now that has been widened. Now, these nanomaterials, we utilize them for various things. Now, we are simply saying that, or rather, scientists have come to realize that doing science at the nanoscale is more effective, even though the gadgets that we are using are in nanoscale, but then the kind of job that they do is quite significant. And so that explains the term more for less. In other words, we are using small gadgets, but we can do a lot of things. Now, what are some of the things that we have been able to do with the nanotechnology? We started with a hood where we are getting cellulose, and then we extract that and get cellulose, which is a biopolymer. Now, this cellulose, we put it in a former solution and we spin it. And we are going to show you that after modifying that cellulose, we are able, and of course, we also utilize the chitosan. It's also another biopolymer which is naturally found, particularly in lobster. So when you are eating lobster, remember, we can be able to use the leftovers or the residues of that to make nanofibers out of that. And so we are able to do that by a process or technique called electrospinning, where we are spinning the polymer solutions and coming up with fibers. Now, these fibers later, we're going to see that how they are packaged. First and foremost, we got to find out what they are. So we characterize them, and then we pack them in cartridges so that we can be able to treat water. Another part of the research, and obviously that is just part of the equations that we have to use to find out how much of the metal has been collected, or rather removed from the nanofibers. A number of experiments. Obviously, the target is that can we able to use those nanofibers and pack them in cartridges, or even in at home where we have got purifiers. If that is possible, then that is going to be a breakthrough for us. Now, in addition to that, we also we prepare nanoparticles. These are metal nanoparticles, and that explains the journey of the metals again. And we put them in membranes, which I'm going to show there. We put them in membranes, and later then we can be able to use that one for water purification, particularly for the degradation of organics. Now, Vice Chancellor, because I can see from the faces of everybody that we are all tired with this chemistry, which is a lot. It's just warming up. Right, and so therefore that is just a pathway to show how to prepare these nanoparticles, which, as I indicated there, we are going to insert them there, and we're going to use these membranes for water purification. Now, and obviously, once you prepare that, you need to characterize. As you know, science is a way of, or rather, it's a field that you have to prove that that is really has been done. So you characterize that, and we can be able to identify where these metals are found. Later on, we also investigated and found that we can be able to degrade chlorinated compounds. Within 9 hours, we are able to get about 98% of removal of these organic substances using the nanoparticles that have been inserted in the membranes. And of course, this was also another example to show how these nanoparticles have been degrading organic substances in water. And we can be able to start with the colored water, end up with the clear water. Vice Chancellor, this is the last slide, which I am going to share with you. And I'm just hoping that with all that journey that I've shared with you, that we've been able to show that metals, we live with them every single day, in good times and bad times. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening to my talk. I really appreciate the time you have spent in this hall. Even though you're not a chemist, but you were patient enough to be here with me in my talk. Thank you very much.
Vice Chancellor and Principal, Executive Dean, forgive me, Catherine, honorary guests, ladies and gentlemen, mankind, and sadly I'm being gender specific here, possibly, mankind has inherited paradise, and probably through most times of lack of knowledge, but increasingly through greed and avarice, has determined to make sure that we will damage our inheritance. Sadly, as things go on, as resources become smaller and smaller and more difficult to obtain, and even more worryingly, as technology progresses, the need of people like Catherine here to monitor the pollution that is taking place increases and becomes even more and more urgent. On a minor note, I did find out why I never liked tea, but let that pass. I want to tell you another journey, and I'm just going to relate slightly differently a journey that she's taken. And I do want to say I thought it was actually quite magnificent of her to have chosen right in the beginning of her research a topic that she could live with for the rest of the active research programs, and namely that is metals. Tonight I found out it was decided for her, but whatever the case might be, she has used it and carried it well through all the difficult stages. Initially, obviously, it was a case of pollution, and it's very interesting to see why the Okavango Delta is so pristine. Because if you think about Botswana, you don't actually think about the largest diamond mine in the world, you think about the Okavango Delta. And consequently, its water there is of utmost importance to the viability of the country itself. If we go back further, she then looked, and instead of using normal sort of equipment to determine metal concentrations, she developed her electrode system, and I just want to put it into perspective for you. Electrode system like she was demonstrating there will probably cost in the region of about 45,000 Rand. The GCFAAS, which she compared to, probably cost close to three-quarters of a million Rand. And that is the sort of advantages that she was demonstrating there. Her research is kept up to date, obviously, with latest development, and you can see the role of nanotechnology is becoming increasingly important. And here, the journey, if you've noticed, there was a subtle change. She's no longer monitoring pollution, but she's endeavoring to remedy it, which obviously is of even more importance. On a personal note, if I can end that way, I can only wish you well. I wouldn't say this publicly, but some people like myself are getting to the stage where we're no longer going to be doing research. But it is good to see people like Catherine here who are going to carry the baton further and take it further and faster in the research that he's doing. I wish you well with your research, and even more importantly, I wish you well as an educator. Thank you.
Let me begin with Professor Kringle by extending again warm appreciation to you for your remarks. As you can imagine, throughout the year I sit, I observe, I officiate at professorial inaugurations, and I've observed how our respondents seek to find their place and space in the conversation. And I must admit that there are occasions where the respondent seeks to outshine the inauguree. And I have to just, be calm. There was one particular occasion where the respondent took 25 minutes. And the advice we normally offer is 7-ish, 8-ish minutes. And of course, the respondent was really enjoying this moment. And I looked at the professor, and all I could do was smile and try and recover the moment later on. So it's a challenging role being respondent, and we want to express appreciation for the manner in which you've acquitted yourself this evening. We're truly grateful for your remarks. Of course, Professor Ngila, there you have it. Again, of course, the inaugural lecture is also challenging because if one pictures it too ordinary, too much for the public, then it doesn't really help us to say, man, is this a real professor? You know? So that's the other challenge. It is to be able to profess on the occasion, but also to be able to profess to an audience that is, as you pointed out, is not full of professors of chemistry, or for that matter, professors of applied chemistry. And so the second observation, of course, is what I referred to in my opening remarks, and so there you have it, the two freedoms, critic and advocate. You judge for yourself how Professor Ngila has responded to that challenge. What I can observe is that it is evident that she, from what we've learned this evening and from her from the introduction of her by Professor Motete, she has been an outstanding mentor of tens of postgraduate students, guardian of standards. We have heard her reflect implicitly on this, an enabler of networking and a mobilizer of resources for others. It is evident again in the account that we have heard this evening. And then, of course, finally, ambassador for the discipline, and one hopes for the institution as well. Clearly, a strong ambassador for the discipline that she advocates and that she advances in her role. And so, it is therefore my great pleasure and my responsibility then to formally cut the ribbon, so to speak, on the ceremonial moment and entry, as I said earlier, into the realms of this university and the world's universities, most distinguished scholars. So it is not just the University of Johannesburg. When she walks into those conference halls, when she dialogues with her peers, when she co-publishes with peers, it will be as professor, as equal, and not as, what is the word? No longer as associate professor, but as a full professor, as the most senior scholar, as the authority in her field. And so congratulations, and we know that you're going to have many wonderful years of great joy, of great revelation, of great partnership and collaboration inside the university, with our peers in South Africa, across the region, and globally. And so may your networks and your work flourish in the decades that lie ahead. And so congratulations and our best wishes.